Hello, I am Iris Stammberger. I am a cognitive psychologist, organizational consultant, and educator. For years, I have specialized in helping professionals discern what tools for thinking are useful when they have to deal with complex challenges. The tools for thinking help them improve their understanding, their judgment, and their decision making. Welcome to my show. Today, I use two different tools for thinking to demonstrate that the term white fragility, even when memorable, is a linguistic trap. Through her best-selling book, White Fragility, Why It Is So Difficult for White People to Talk About Racism, Dr. Robin DiAngelo, a sociologist and corporate trainer and consultant, has reached thousands of well-intentioned Americans who want social justice and racial equity. DiAngelo's teaching method is to connect white people, such as herself, with racism, white fragility, white solidarity, and white supremacy, and to make them confront the implicit biases that make them, according to her, racists. DiAngelo reports that in her training sessions, when she challenges white participants by connecting them to racism, quote, the smallest amount of racial stress is intolerable for them and often triggers a range of defensive responses. She says that these responses include anger, fear, and guilt, and, quote, behaviors such as argumentation, silence, or withdrawal from the stress-inducing situation, end of quote. She conceptualizes the responses as white fragility, an expression, according to DiAngelo, of a desire to return to racial comfort and maintain their dominance, their white dominance within the racial hierarchy. So let's see how these white fragility concepts manage to go through the lens of the levels of analysis tool. The levels of analysis tool, also known as levels of abstraction, is a tool used by science and engineering and many other professions to understand complex systems. For instance, in social science, a system could be described at the structural or historic level, at the sociocultural level, at the individual level, and at the biological level. Each one of these levels captures some unique aspects of the system being described and creates a hierarchy of phenomena. Yet, if one phenomenon is described or captured at a particular level, it must be addressed at the same level. For instance, if we described a computer, which is a complex system, in terms of its software and its hardware, we do not describe a hardware problem in terms of a software problem or a software problem in terms of a hardware problem. DiAngelo's book approaches the biological level and historic level from the start. In the foreword, Michael Eric Dyson, a professor of sociology at George Washington University, states, quote, whiteness, like race, may not be true. It is not a biologically heritable characteristic that has roots in physiological structures or in genes or chromosomes. But, he says, it's real in the sense that societies and rights and goods and resources and privileges have been built on its foundation. In other words, according to Dyson, even if race is not true at the biological level, it is real and therefore true at the structural level. This, in my opinion, it's a sound illustration on how to use the levels of analysis tool. DiAngelo also starts by setting the stage at the structural level by pointing to the fact that, quote, in the United States was founded on the principle that all people are created equal. Yet The nation began with the attempted genocide of indigenous people and the theft of their land. She says, American wealth was built on the labor of kidnapped and enslaved Africans and their descendants. She also addresses the biological and structural level when writing, quote, there is no biological race as we understand it, yet race will influence today whether we will survive our birth, whether we are most likely to live, which schools we will attend, who our friends and partners will be, what careers we will have, how much money we will earn, how healthy we will be, and even how long we will expect to live. I think she's right. Her next step is to define racism as a phenomenon that occurs at the structural level. Building on the work of other sociologists, such as herself, D'Angelo defines racism as a, quote, a system of advantage based on race, a deeply embedded historical system of institutional power. In doing so, D'Angelo is challenging our current definition of racism as individual and intentional acts of racial discrimination. In my opinion, as a sociologist, she can redefine, of course, can redefine a concept. The problem comes in what she does next, when she applies her redefined concept at the sociocultural and at the individual level. Let's see. Because the defensiveness D'Angelo elicits in white people is so predictable. And because in examining her own biases as a white woman, she finds herself to be a racist, of which she offers examples, D'Angelo generalizes to all white people and concludes that the unexamined believes that prop up white people responses are what she calls, quote, the pillars of whiteness. She says that those biases, those pillars of whiteness are an expression of a racial implicit bias. In other words, because she finds herself to be a racist, she calls all whites racists. This is not a scientific argument. Additionally, D'Angelo argues that the white people's defensiveness, what she calls white fragility, arises in her training sessions because white people do not see themselves in racial terms. Yet, she also claims that whites exhibit white solidarity as a group, which, and I quote, requires both silence about anything that exposes the advantage of the white population and tacit agreement to remain racially united in the protection of white supremacy. But yet, think about this. How are individual white people supposed to support white solidarity and white supremacy as a group if they were not aware of their individual whiteness before entering into D'Angelo's training? D'Angelo combines the individual level and the social, generalizes her own biases to all whites as a social group, and denies individual white people agency. Because only white people, according to her, can be racist, as a system of structural racism favors them. I conclude that white fragility fails when using the levels of analysis tool. The next tool I want to use, the second tool for thinking, is our ability to identify errors in thinking. With this tool, white fragility is guilty at least of 3 errors in logic, 3 white fallacies. First, white fragility is a circular argument, because a circular argument is when you try to say A happens because of B and B happens because of A. That's what she does with white fragility, because people react with defensiveness, they are fragile. And they are fragile because they react with defensiveness. This is a perfect example of a circular argument, circular logic. It is like saying that, oh, Anna is popular because she has many friends. And Anna has many friends because she is popular. Or that Mario is a bachelor because he's unmarried. In the case of white fragility, I believe that the circularity serves to act as a linguistic trap because it allows D'Angelo to attack white people and at the same time to raise the concept against them when they react defensively. Thanks to this circularity, I believe white fragility serves both as her sword and her shield. The second thinking error or logical fallacy I find in white fragility is the Kafka trap. The Kafka trap is an argument that tries to overcome, dominate, break an opponent by inducing a sense of guilt and by using the opponent denial as further proof that they are guilty. The logic of the Kafka trap makes you guilty when you defend yourself, and guilty if you do not defend yourself. Just by entering the room where D'Angelo is teaching, if you are white, you are trapped, you are guilty of white fragility or racism. Either you accept your guilt and go through the re-educational work she wants you to do, or you are guilty of white fragility. Why? Because she defines white fragility as defensiveness, anger, fear, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, or withdrawal from the stress-inducing situation. You cannot do anything, you are guilty. If, for instance, people defend themselves by saying, I was taught to treat everyone the same, or our grandchildren are multiracial, and I'm married to a person of color, or race doesn't have any meaning to me. For D'Angelo, she lists all these things in one of her chapters. This is obscuring the structural nature of racism by placing yourself in the non-racist side. In summary, by the fact that people are white, they are already racist and they don't have a way to defend themselves. Any other teacher or consultant, I believe, would have examined her own teaching, her practice as a teacher when confronted with such negative reactions over and over, but not D'Angelo. She offers no examination of her teaching method. She acts as the, quote, new sheriff in town, as Professor Dyson calls her in the foreword. It is like punching somebody in the face and being surprised because they become defensive. Being a sheriff is not a good teaching method. A cognitive psychologist myself, a former university lecturer, and an organizational trainer and consultant, I can tell you, I have not once seen there is success in making the people defensive from the start. In a scathing review in the Atlantic magazine, Professor John McWhorton of Columbia University calls the book a racist track that talks down to Black people. He's Black himself. In his article, The Humanizing Condescension of White Fragility, he writes, quote, the answer to white fragility entails, according to D'Angelo, an elaborate and pitilessly dehumanizing condescension towards Black people. The sad truth is that anyone falling under the sway of these blinkered, self-satisfied, punitive stunt of a primer has been taught by a well-intentioned but tragically misguided pastor how to be racist in a whole new way. He calls white fragility a cult. And so does Matt Taibbi, the reporter for Rolling Stone and writer at Substack.com. On his recent article on white fragility, a few thoughts on America's smash hit #1 guide to egghead racialism, Taibbi addresses D'Angelo's critique of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. In that speech, as we all remember, Martin Luther King hopes that one day his children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Yet, for D'Angelo, and Taibbi points to that, this color blindness, it's itself racist. Taibbi then fears the negative consequence of the increased discrimination that such a position would create, when, for instance, laws are approved based on racial categories. He calls white fragility a dingbat racialist cult. Perhaps white fragility looks like a cult because of its circularity and because it's a Kafka trap, but also, I would say, because it is a DPT. A DPT is a phrase that seems true and profound, but that is ambiguous and shallow. A DPT appears to be wise and inspirational, but has little or no meaning. Daniel Dennett, the philosopher of mind, introduced the term DPT in his book, Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking. He says that a DPT is a sort of quick and ready statement that people can use when they do not want to think or when they want to sound intelligent. He uses the example, quote, love is just a word, but also another DPT is there is no I in team, or everything happens for a reason. Each one of these is a DPT, like white fragility, I would add. They all seem true and profound, but through a second reading, we discover that they're ambiguous and shallow. In cognitive psychology, a DPT is called pseudo-BS. BS is defined as a topic of study and is something that is designed to impress without regard for the truth. But a DPT or pseudo-BS is more than that. It's a special type of BS. It goes beyond what could be said by your drunk friend at a bar, in that a DPT has the intent of looking profound, has the intent of tricking the listener by presenting more than one meaning. The listener should resist the trick. So, if white fragility is a DPT, what can you do when your school, your friends, or colleagues want to embark in the white fragility journey, in their desire for a higher level of awareness, in their desire for social justice and racial equity? In my opinion, you could recommend any of the many programs available to overcome stereotypes, to understand the structural nature of racism, to understand stereotypes. You could create a study group or become active in a social movement. For organizations, there are many educational programs to counter stereotyping, such as exposure to individuals who defy the stereotypes, intergroup contact, even mindfulness-based interventions, study groups, employee participation in socially responsible programs, and many more. Yet, if you do not have the choice, if you feel forced to enter into the linguistic trap set by a white fragility program, use the tools I have used here. You will be surprised how many people, black and white, support you. For more of these and some references, follow me at Iris Stammberger. For more, follow me on Twitter at Iris Stammberger. For more, follow me on Twitter at For more, follow me on Twitter at Iris Stammberger. For more, follow me on Twitter at Iris Stammberger. Thanks.